Ah, how about that? How about that? Did it work? Did it work? Ah, ugh. The things that this obnoxious streaming software does to me. I'm so sorry, you guys. So yeah, you didn't miss much. You saw a cow go across the screen. That was about all. And I was complaining, or actually not complaining, about the music. So that is a child's music playlist that I've been using. I think maybe last week I was using just my plain old like do ending music, but this child's playlist for whatever reason does not, and it's royalty free. I'm not stealing music, but it doesn't get muted. And I had a whole bunch of these like cool like lo-fi hip hop lounge music kind of ones that I think you guys like, that they kept getting muted. And I think, I'm not positive, but I was looking at my videos the other day on my back end, and I think they've been unmuted. So maybe Twitch got with the program or something. I don't know. So well, I'll try to go back to those because I really like those tunes. Those were like kind of cool. Anyway, but my little cow friend here. This, I believe, was a little creature that our friend Jill had purchased on a previous shopping trip, and she kept trying to get me to obtain it from her. And I'm like, girl, I got so many of these little animals, not just ones made out of quilts, but just, little cute little fabric animals. I have an entire baby cradle full of them, and I'm like, I don't need more. But she gave me this one as a gift. Chill. Lurking. So let me say hi to everybody. I saw lots of people. Druid, my dear, I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for checking my sound. And Mod Art, hey girl. Kellen, I heard from a little bird who might be Kellen herself that she's the newest member of AQSG. Ah, isn't that exciting? Morodem, hello my dear. Mishral, I'm so glad that you can lurk. Being a scofflaw on a Monday. Meetings are stinky, so, happy to be here. See, Morodem, did I say hi? Howdy, howdy. Jill, of course. So, we always have our Monday lurkers. So, hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. Get out of here with my negativity. Oh Lord, you guys. I should bring them all down sometime. They live in my on the landing in my hallway. I have this big corner shelf that is just chock full of my old artwork, toys, dolls and stuffed things, and little bits and pieces of my son's elementary school artwork. It's jammed with stuff. So yeah, I should liberate the little animals sometime. I don't know if you guys see Long Duck. I don't remember if I had Long Duck out last time. Long Duck has been here. Oh. Long Duck was something that Jill picked up. It's been a year ago, I think. Yeah, Snake Duck. I think of it like, I don't know if anybody has children that are the same age as mine, but there's a thing called long Furby where people take their Furbies and hack them and make these weird long Furbies. And that's what this reminds me of. Long Duck. Or Snake Duck. Anyway. So the weather here was absolutely divine this weekend. I sneezed nonstop. Yes, a Furby peed. Yes, I have seen one of those. It's terrifying. All you have to do is Google long Furby and you will see, they're charming, kind of, but kind of creepy. So, yeah. Anyway, so I sneezed myself to death this weekend, but also made some progress on my piece for my Artist James Scholar project. So I showed you guys one of the typewriter carcasses last week. I showed you, I think, at least one of my rolling pins. And, I doubled down on the rolling pins in case one or two of them don't fit. I have extras. But I have made big progress. And so I And no offense if any of you are fans or do this, but I am so sick of those like slow-mo quilt reveals on Instagram. But I thought I'd do one of my own. So here's a not slow-mo reveal for you. And because it's long, it's very long. At this moment, this is reminding me of, did you ever make one of those little cinemas inside a box where you cut the, a little frame in the box and you put like pencils through there and like adding machine tape and you make yourself a little, that's what this reminds me of. There's a lot of it. Yes, I've gotten a ton done. And this is only one side. The other side, I'm still working on, so I'm not gonna do an amazing unroll because there are pins and needles in here. But this side is the other side, and it's just as long. Actually, it's longer. So the words are written, and actually, I'll show you this one because it's just up close. And I just finished this one this morning. So they're written with archival. I use fabric markers and archival markers, so they won't bleed. They're, and then I go back in and I do coloring with fabric markers. So that'll be the next step. But yeah, everything on here is hand stitched. And initially my plan was to do more machine stitching, but I just can't do it. I want it to be just right. I want it to be a certain way, and like the only way I feel like I can achieve that is with hand stitching. So I've got my calluses back. I had been doing some easier hand stitching, and this is a little bit more rigorous because I'm stitching through lots of layers. So anyway, these are the two sides of the piece. And I mean, it's like a quilted piece. I don't know, you guys. I mean, I've described it, and I feel like every time I tell people, they're looking at me like, oh, that sounds awesome. And I can see the look in their eyes and the wheels turning in their head like, whatever she's describing, I cannot picture this. So I always feel like it's one of those things where, and if you've ever done like a corporate team building where, I actually caught an episode of 30 Rock the other day where they did this, but it's like you have this team of 3 people or more, and one person is the one that has the picture, and they have to describe to everyone else what they're seeing, and then you look and see like what people come up with, and usually it's just insanity. So I feel like every time I try to describe what I'm doing, you guys are going like, guess we'll see it when it's done. But I also have the audio files, so there's that component of it. So this week is like a real big push because while I could take the sewing with me on my trip to California, I can't take the other pieces. But I need to finish the sewing first before I can move on to the other pieces. So it's one of those chicken and the egg things. So cross your fingers for me. If I don't get as much done this week as I want to, there will be some furious making and stitching and hammering and gluing when I come back. So there's an update there. The other update, so this has actually been a really fun weekend. Besides the fact that I got some work done. This top, sorry to digress, but I don't wear this much because I feel like this ruffle here, it doesn't work well. It's always turning itself over and looking weird. Anyway, I don't even know if this is the right color for me. I feel like this is a summer and I'm more of a winter, spring, I don't know. So, I think I told you guys about this. Absolutely charming quilt top that Jill purchased from our friend. And then I kept looking at it and basically informed Jill that I would be acquiring it from her. I did not give her a choice because, you were not going to find another customer. This is mine. Just because it's charming. And so while we were in Pennsylvania, we did a tiny bit of research. Jill actually found another version of it. I did not steal it. I paid you for it. And the other version we found, and I showed it on Thursday, I think, last Thursday. But the backing was this kind of pale golden color. I think that the tree part, the leaves and everything were a similar color, like that kind of 1930s green. That, like, I guess it's like an Art Deco green. It's almost like a jade. Hey, Patty. And then it was all solids. So like all of these floral pieces and the butterfly and all that stuff. And I don't think it's ugly at all, Jill. I liked it. I thought it was really pretty, but it would just look so different from this. So anyway, we shared that link with our friend who originally owned this. And then, of course, I had it behind me on Thursday. And our friend, Mary Kay, caught this, and she knew what it was. Like, she remembered it. Because we had been saying, well, it's got to be a kit quilt, right? Because you can see kind of around the edges. This has never been washed. So you can kind of see around the edges where, it's pretty decent applique. I've found a few little bumps and things here, but I mean, I'm not a perfect appliquer, so I'm like, they did a good job with this. But you can see some of the little spots around the edges where you can still see a pre-printed background. And so you see that with these kit quilts. And if you've ever looked at Paragon, Busilla, there was a couple of other companies that did, these pre-printed backgrounds, and then sometimes even pre-printed shapes, that you would cut out to applique on. Well, I knew it could not have been one of those types of kits because the fabrics were so different. So I kept thinking like, well, maybe it was just sold as this pre-printed background, and then you got the pattern and you just did the rest with your own fabrics. So anyway, that was where my mind was. So then Mary Kay, to the rescue. She knows a lot about kit quilts. She's done a lot of research into this time period. And it turns out that this quilt pattern was a Florence Leganke or Leganke. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name, but it's spelled, well, Florence, but the last name is spelled Laganke. And she is a well-known person throughout the early 20th century because she was the woman behind the Nancy Page newspaper quilts. And so, the Nancy Page Quilt Club was syndicated in like all the major newspapers. And I'm trying to remember if maybe in the beginning it just said Nancy Page, or some of the newspapers only said Nancy Page. But I do know as time went on, you could definitely find, it would say Nancy Page's Quilt Club, but then it would have like Florence Leganke as a byline. So she definitely, her name was out there. She was well known. But this was not a newspaper quilt. This was published in a magazine called Country Gentleman. And it was 55 cents to get the pattern. And guess what? The pattern was an iron-on. And it was something that had crossed my mind, like, could this have been something where you bought an iron-on? But then I thought, gosh, this is awfully big for that. Like, did they make iron-ons that big? And did they make them in the 30s? Like, I don't know. But anyway, this is late 30s. It was published in Country Gentleman. And we did find, along with Mary Kay and our friend Barb, they found some more links. So there's more information about it online that I've skimmed over. And it's just so cool to find out the history of this quilt pattern. One other thing I found, I joked to Jill, like, Country Gentleman, what in the heck? But what I discovered is Country Gentleman, like, in my mind, when I heard Country Gentleman, I'm thinking like, like those magazines you see today, like Country Home, it's about, people who have these gorgeous homes out in the country and own horses and stuff. Like, that's what I'm picturing, but actually Country Gentleman, early 20th century, was like a farm magazine. So it was like, I'm trying to think of what the different ones there. You guys know when I try to remember something, it's like it goes right away. But like, was it like Prairie Farmer or something? I don't know. All of those farm ones, oh gosh, I think there's like a whole block of the month, the book thing of, one of those magazines where, they just had the serial patterns that came out, just like Kansas City Star, all of those. So anyway, lots of quilt patterns out there in the 30s. Quilts were popular to make early 20th century. And so this is just one of bazillion, but it's really cool that I mean, I was very familiar with the Nancy Page slash Florence Legank stuff, Leganky. And I did think, like, in my mind, I thought, the leaves and the birds look a lot like this other Nancy Page slash Florence Leganky quilt. But, you know, I mean, I second guess myself a lot because sometimes I think, well, sometimes I know I come up with the wrong answer. It seems like it's right, you know, it seems like a good answer, but anyway, this was a case where I should not have second guessed myself because indeed it was an iron-on and indeed it was made, you know, in the same vein as this other quilt pattern. The other quilt pattern was called Magic Vine or Magic Vines, and it very much these same leaves, except they came down in stripes, and then it had the flowers. And that one was published in the newspaper. So if you have a newspapers.com account, you can find all these. So, well, this one you cannot because it was only in Country Gentleman, but it's kind of fun. And yes, the 30s are fascinating to me, and so cool that it was absolutely an iron-on, that they totally had that technology then. And I mean, that's no surprise because, you know, those like table like table covers and dresser scarves and all the stuff that people were embroidering, you know, mid-century, you know, that stuff didn't just crop up in 1950, you know, that there were those before that. So anyway, it was an exciting little detective thing. And I mean, certainly I couldn't have done it, you know, figured all this out without lots of help from the gurus. But I also think it's really fun that, you know, we live in a time when we can kind of communicate. You know, I mean, we can Google stuff. Google didn't help Jill and I very much. We found, you know, again, the one quilt. But the fact that Mary Kay and Barb kind of thought of some other keywords to Google and Mary Kay recognized it, I just feel really lucky that we have not only technology to search and connect with each other, but we also have like the brain trust of people that came before us that are still researching and, you know, just have the encyclopedic knowledge, in my opinion, where they can look at something and kind of immediately see, you know, either, oh, I know what that is, or I know where to look, or, you know, let's look here and see if that takes us, you know, where we want to go. So fun detective work. It's a lot more fun than the detective work that I have been recently working on in my personal life. My professional life, in my life that pays the mortgage, put it that way. Instructional systems development. I've been working on a project for a really long time, and it's law enforcement adjacent. It's very cool stuff, but it's a little bit more high stakes than you know, history and quilt study. So this is detective work I like. The law enforcement stuff is a little more like, ooh, because it's, I don't know. It just feels high stakes because it involves crime, you know. So anyway, I won't get too much further into that because, you know, I've signed non-competes. So, apologize. I keep clearing my throat, but oh my gosh, you guys, the pollen. Like I said, this weekend was beautiful. I mean, just fantastic, but the pollen. And I'm sure those of you that live East Coast or Midwest, I know, deal with this. I feel like the West Coast maybe doesn't have as much, or especially in like the warmer deserty areas don't have as much. Although I do know Sacramento. I've heard people that live around Sacramento or travel to Sacramento often will have very bad allergies or will have allergy symptoms because there's so many trees in Sacramento and people that are allergic to tree pollen really struggle there. I've only been to Sacramento a few times, and I was okay, so it must have been like seasonally. I was there during a good time. So the other thing I did this weekend was a little embroidery class at my library. So I am lucky. I live literally what amounts to like 2 city blocks from my local library branch, and it is in an old, I think it was originally the high school for this little teeny town I live in. So it's, you know, this itty bitty little building that is, you know, old, very old, extremely old. And I think there's like kind of a part built onto the side of it to you know, make the library the size it needs to be, and it has a second story. So anyway, I had not been there in a very long time. Once they started offering stuff online where you could get audiobooks online from the library, I had no need to go to the library anymore. And it makes me feel bad because, I live in Baltimore County, and our library system is very good. And it's tapped into the statewide library system. And I just think here in Maryland, we just happen to have, in my opinion, a good library system. But anyway, check your local libraries. I think a lot of them, now that we're out from under the pandemic and people are wanting to do things again, I think the library, my mom said, the library was offering some cool stuff. So, Molly, hey! So, long story short, I discovered a few weeks ago that my library, well, if you're out there lurking and somebody says library and you happen to be a librarian of some sort, you got to swoop in. But I guess it was probably at least a month ago, if not longer. I played a video about, it was about embroidery or embroiderers of Palestine. And they were older women. Many of them had been affected by previous Palestinian diaspora, being forced out of where they live into refugee camps. And so the type of embroidery that they did, it boils down, it's essentially cross stitch. Like that's what it looks like from the front side. But they use this embroidery stitch, just densely cross stitch on these beautiful garments. And I just, I showed that video, and if those of you that were here saw that video, in the stream on demand, like the work that they were doing is so amazing. And I remember them talking about how regionally they ran into different types of stitches, different patterns, etc. So I saw that this little class was being offered, and I thought, well, this is a chance to actually try it, hopefully with somebody that, didn't just read a book. And as I was lucky, yes, the woman who taught the class is a librarian there at my branch, but she's Palestinian and Jordanian. I guess she has a parent who's Palestinian, one who's Jordanian. And so she said, growing up, as just part culturally of her family, these types of embroidered garments were just, ubiquitous. Like, she was used to seeing them. And so she learned how to do the craft, the stitching. And so she did this class. And it was very simple. And this is what I came out of the class with. And you're probably looking at it and you're going, oh, great, Stephanie, counted cross stitch. Yes, but also, this is not easy to do because it's not just cross stitch. So for those of you that have done embroidery and cross stitch before, if you like counted cross stitch, you probably know some of the techniques to make it go faster and whatnot. And one of those is doing a half stitch, right? I personally, yes, Molly, I agree. I think counted cross stitch is hard because inevitably I'll miscount or I'll pick up on the wrong row. Yes, exactly. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this doesn't look right. This cat is like, eh. So it never works out for me. But this has this added element of the fact that there is a specific way the back is supposed to look. And this one and this one, my backs look correct. This one, I'm not 100% sure. And the purpose, so they typically do, it's typically done in one or two colors. But then I saw other stuff that was done in multiple colors. But their goal is for these things to look it's not necessarily reversible. Although there was one garment where I was like, that looks pretty much the same front and back, how they do that. But the back of your cross stitch always looks like that. See, you're neat and tidy. Back of cross stitch I've done was like, crap, I missed one. Let me stretch the thread over here, the floss over here, and it's like, gnarly on the back. But anyway, so doing this one, you essentially don't want anything to cross on the back. You don't want any diagonals on the back. That was kind of the gist of it. You want everything to be these little dashed lines. And so I have some links for you if you're interested in reading up on this. And some of these show, like this is my little pattern sheet. Some of these show what the back is supposed to look like. So the back can be tidy or as interesting as the front. I like that. So let me give you some links. So first of all, the embroiderer's video, in case you missed that, it is such a good video. It's about, where's the share link? Here we go. It is about 20 minutes, I think. But it's so worth the time to watch, and it is subtitled. But it's almost one of those things like I remember thinking to myself, like, you don't really even have to know necessarily what their words are. You can look at what they're talking about and you kind of can get the gist of it. And I mean, I go back to the fact that I feel like needle and thread is just one of those things that, I mean, I think all artists and craftspeople can sort of transcend language with their techniques and their tools. You know, you could walk into, you know, a quilt shop or a needlework shop or a sewing shop in any other country in the world, and at the very least, you have the needle and thread in common, right? I would assume woodworkers could walk into a wood shop in some other place and be like, I know these tools, I know what they do, I can communicate with you wordlessly with these tools. And I really feel like needle and thread is the same thing. But as she was, the librarian, her name was Grace, as Grace was showing us some of these things, let me see this one. This floral one really fascinated me. But you can see how they build, you know, these different patterns, and they'll name them things. Like this is a carnation. Well, these are all carnations, different versions of carnations. But like this thing right here is called a feather. They have one called Pasha's Tent. And that one is when, you know, my ears perked up, because if you guys have ever looked at Gee's Bend or done any reading about them, you know that one of their common patterns is a kind of it's two different patterns they do. They're either courthouse steps or log cabin, but their intent is to make it look like a house. You're looking down at a house, and I think I've seen it called Lazy Girl, or you know, something related to the house. And Pasha's Tent is the same thing. It's like, it's, you know, looking down on, say, these, you know, Berber nomads and their tent. And I'm like, so interesting to me that, say, Gee's Bend, which was, you know, they were creating in a vacuum. And then these women, you know, in these parts of the Middle East and also Eastern Europe, because there's some overlap there, you know, how their sewing traditions, like they were, for whatever reason, were cut off, you know, from other people. We've got, you know, a diaspora where people are in like refugee camps, and they're put in there with people of, you know, their culture is slightly different. They're regionally different. But they're still cut off from like the world at large. And same thing, you know, has kind of happened in Eastern Europe throughout the ages. And you know, a lot of this is what we were looking at, not necessarily like ancient work, but, you know, really like the last 100 years of, you know, what has happened in these areas. And I mean, for a lot of people, it's within our own lifetimes. You know, if you're older, if you're a baby boomer, you know, this changes, the Palestinian diaspora was like 1948. So, you know, when the state of Israel was declared. So, you know, there's a lot of really complicated history there, and it's all kind of, you know, not very far back in our rearview mirror. So anyway, I don't want to get into all the political stuff, but it's just amazing to me. I mean, again, look at this. How much does that look like a quilt design? And then they'll take apart the various pieces, and then they'll come up. So this border, this sort of border treatment, is the pieces of the carnation that they've turned into this border treatment. So you can see those little triangle-y things then become the border treatment. So it's just really fascinating. It looked to me so much like it's a different type of needlework, but like the development of it and the thought process, just it reminds me so much of quilting and so much of other types of needlework that have come up. And it's like we can sit here and think like we invented this, that, and the other, but you know Tatreez Traditions, for whatever reason, is calling this Moon of Bethlehem, but I will tell you that in some of the other stuff that Grace showed us, this is called Star of Bethlehem. And so we know what Star of Bethlehem looks like, Lone Star / Star of Bethlehem. I mean, it's just these motifs that over and over are seen in different communities, and it's fascinating that these things were developed without the connection of each other. Now, obviously, with refugees and also with trade routes, this stuff gets shared sometimes. So, sometimes you can trace that. We talked a lot during Black History Month, and looking at the Underground Railroad, that whole myth, and the idea that enslaved people did bring these different symbols and things from Africa. So you can kind of see, like, I guess I definitely am rambling here, but you can kind of see these threads of, created in a vacuum, but maybe influenced, but also created in a vacuum. Like, I mean, how many American quilt makers had any kind of contact with Palestinian people until the 20th century, So anyway, I just thought it was so neat to look at this stuff and go like, we are not so different after all, with needle and thread, we are definitely dovetailed in many, many ways. So, and also a plug for public libraries. Your tax money pays for what they do. They really, I feel like there was a little bit of a time period when my son was in elementary school, where, the libraries, just like the government, were struggling to kind of keep up with technology. But I would say now, libraries, there's a lot of communities that invest a lot of money in libraries, and they have good stuff. And it's just a matter of, like just looking and seeing. And yeah, I feel like I've been kind of bad the last decade or so, because with my son not needing to go to the library for school, and like I said, I can get all the audiobooks I want from the app that connects to the library. But I was so excited to see, like, a crafty history kind of thing. So and I wanted to share this website, Tatreez Traditions, because if it is something you want to look into, I think this one is pretty good. The patterns are nice, and I think they have quite a bit of free stuff too. So yeah. Well, let us get into the next thing, which is our dear friend of Florence. I think we are on coverlets now. And it was funny, there was on the AQSG Facebook page, I think it's probably the members only one, there was some questions about one of Florence's quilts. And I don't have it pulled up right now, but there's this pretty famous picture of her, I'm trying to think if I've ever showed it, I can't remember, but it's like she's standing in in like a booth, and there's a quilt behind her, and then she's got some quilts over her arm. Well, the one quilt that's over her arm I recognize, because it's one of the quilts I looked at possibly to do for the 2025 quilt study for AQSG, but I decided to look at her other one. So oh, hey, Anon Maker, library assistant bought a Martelli's long arm machine. What? That is so cool. You know what? I actually have, now that you mention that, I have heard of a number of libraries that have done that. They've gotten, like, I don't know about long arms, but definitely like the laser cutters and things, and the Cricut, like the scrapbook cutting machines. I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's any of them around here and where I am that have done that. I feel like it was somebody up in New York. that was talking about their library had done something like that. So yeah, I mean, maker spaces are, I feel like right before the pandemic, they were really, getting a lot of traction. And I don't know, how much the pandemic affected maker spaces. We've got a couple in Baltimore and they seem to be doing okay. But yeah, like even I feel like the libraries can even kind of do more low key maker spaces, like regular sewing machines and, like those Cricut machines, and they don't necessarily need the woodworking equipment, but those sort of smaller crafty kind of things that, oh yeah, regular sewing machines too. Okay, yeah. So, and I think those are like that's like the gateway drug, right? For people that are like, I might want to learn how to use a sewing machine, so they can check one out from the library or use it, and then they say, now I know I can go buy one because I can use this. I think that's such a great thing. I love stuff like that. I think that is wonderful. And I hope more communities look at things like that, for sure. So, anyway, this discussion on AQSG was, what happened to this particular quilt that was behind Florence Peto in this picture. And I looked at Passion for Quilts, which is the book about her. And there's a whole section on the museums that she donated and showed quilts at, and none of them listed that particular quilt. So it's kind of anybody's guess what happened to it, unless somebody really knows. And I feel like maybe it's at one of the museums, and it's just like the Shelburne in Vermont. They have a lot of her quilts. Now it's possible some have been sold off, but she kind of helped start the museum. And so I'm thinking like maybe it's there. I don't know, but it's like one of those things. Again, it's a detective. It's like being a detective to track these things down. It's kind of fun. So yeah, you're right. If you don't have space for equipment, like, a long arm, I've done a tiny bit of long arming. And I think I've mentioned, like, I have a Grace frame, which is not exactly the same thing as having a long arm, but I mean, I know you can rent time on a long arm at a quilt shop, but yeah, if they have something you can use that, I assume there's probably like got to get a tutorial before they let you loose on it. But what a great way to try something out without having to pay, class time or rental time, whatever. All right, so let's get into some Florence. So we're getting towards the end of the book. There's a section on instruction, which we will probably get to another time. Although I don't know, this section's pretty short on woven coverlets, so maybe we can do some of the instruction part. And it's interesting because there's a lot of text in the instruction part. She's got a few diagrams, but well, you'll see when we get there. So, as a reminder, what we are currently reading is American Quilts and Coverlets by Florence Peto. It's her second book. It was published in 1949. And we are on chapter 4, which is called Woven Coverlets. Let's have some drink. And real quick, let me see. I don't think she even has any pictures of coverlets in here. Yeah, like looks like this whole chapter is. Yeah, I don't think there's any coverlets in here. Well, maybe. No, I take that back. There looks like there's one or two. Okay, so. All right, chapter 4, Woven Coverlets. Weaving was a household function in the first colonial settlements in America, the art having been brought over from England, Scotland, Germany, and the Netherlands. Fertile soil attracted the agricultural-minded Dutch to the western end of Long Island, where a road running from the hills, or what is now Prospect Park, to the ocean had been a trail used by the Carnacy Indians. That's funny, Prospect Park. I was watching something this weekend where it might have been 30 Rock, where somebody got married in Prospect Park. Along this track, the settlers from Holland built their homesteads and established their bouweries. And I guess that's where Bowery comes from, the Bowery in New York City. Through industry and thrift, they prospered. Both men and women brought to the new land an expert knowledge of how to prepare flax and wool for spinning, dyeing, and weaving. Clothing for the entire family was made in the home, and many of the looms were home built, hewn from native timber. The fundamentals of weaving were the same, wherever practiced, and the housewife, Dutch, British, or Mennonite, wove jean, fustian, or thickset, and linsey woolsey for clothing. Bed covers of flax and wool were confined to geometric patterns, stripes, squares, or diamonds, mostly in the overshot weave or simple techniques imposed by the limitations of the narrow four-harness looms. Such coverlets were woven in 2 strips, usually 2.5 to 3 yards long, and seamed down the center. Ida Stilwell, born in the Gravesend colony on western Long Island in 1766, wove a blue and white coverlet in linen warp, overshot with indigo blue wool on such a loom. So let's look at this. So this is the Ida Stilwell coverlet. And then this is a different one below. So this top one is the Ida Stilwell, and this other one, we'll look at this one again. This one is a different. I'm not a big coverlet person. This is terrible. Unless they're like a really, really striking design or an interesting color, I kind of feel like they all look the same. And I'm sure coverlet people would be like, shut your mouth. But yeah, they just, I mean, they're pretty, certainly, but yeah, they're not my jam. So this was linen and blue wool on a loom. It is a sturdy example of the early type of weaving done by women in the home. A wide coverlet with no seaming indicates later mechanical weaving. So interesting. Yeah. So if you think you've got a very old coverlet, it should be in 2 panels. If it's wide, no seam, it's mechanical. The conditions under which weaving was done differed. In mild climates, usually there was a separate loom shed situated a few hundred yards from the dwelling house. In New England, all the equipment for spinning and weaving was set up in the garret when the house had one. So I guess when we think about fairy tales, where was it, Rapunzel was locked up in a high garret. So some sort of attic area. In many frontier homes, the loom was placed in a corner of the common room, where all the activity of the household centered. In the Dutch settlement of Amersfoort, like Gravesend and Brooklyn, I guess that's where Brooklyn comes from. It's spelled Breuckelen. Interesting. One of the original 5 towns on the western end of Long Island, so Amersfoort. The Peter Clausen Wyckoff homestead, which I know she talked a lot about in her other book, Historic Quilts. So Peter Clausen Wyckoff homestead, built by the first Director General of New Amsterdam, who established Peter as his agent, boasted a lean-to which was used as a weave shed by successive generations of Wyckoffs, who occupied the house from 1637 to 1901. Wow, that is a bit of time. Your friend's loom is the centerpiece of her dining room. Yeah, I think we tend to have more furniture in our homes, I guess, than people back in the day. So we kind of have to figure out a place to put big pieces of equipment. I mean, I think of big floor looms, people that weave struggle with that, long armors struggle with that, where to put the thing. These people apparently built their house with that in mind. So there's your goal. There's your goal. If you have a very large piece of creative machinery, whether it's a loom or long arm, if you make wooden stuff, I guess, like a big table saw, whatever, build your house around it. That's the way to go. Speaking of visitors and building houses around things, this is the ruler of my home. my boss and my ruler. Okay. In this home in 1737 was born Peter A. Wyckoff, who wove the single snowball coverlet. So that's this other one, the single snowball coverlet. And I guess those are supposed to be snowballs. They kind of look like that. And let's see, that says detail from double cloth coverlet in snowball pattern woven in a Dutch homestead in Flatlands, Long Island. The top right-hand corner is doubled over to show the reverse side. So I guess that's the kind of the beauty of this type of weaving, is that the colors reverse themselves. Just, I guess, based on the way the warp and the weft are working together. I mean, that's how you create pattern in weaving. So in natural toned flax and rich sapphire blue wool, I bet this was very pretty. It is a fine example of early double cloth weaving. The pattern stands out in sharp distinctness, and the two strips were so evenly woven the seaming is barely noticeable. So he must have been very, very talented. Most good coverlets were made with borders from 10 to 14 inches wide. Rarely was there a top border, though sometimes there was an extra matching strip of weaving for the pillows. Peter was a skilled workman who wove not only for his own family, which consisted of a wife, 13 children, and an enslaved population, but he is known also to have woven wool and linen cloth and blankets for other families in the Flatlands community. Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, I think of a person that I feel like, well, you've got 13 children. I guess you got to do something, I guess, to feed them all. But I feel like a person who had slaves was doing less doing. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's just a terrible... I just feel like anybody who was enslaving others was probably more directing the movements around their property and not getting involved in the actual work. That's, you know, I guess that's just my personal opinion. But apparently this guy was weaving, and weaving for other people. Okay. In every household, fine linen was woven for personal use. Descendants still have sheer linen house caps and heavy quilted linsey woolsey, which is linen warp and wool weft, striped petticoats that were worn by their foremothers. There was an agonizing interruption of the diligent, peaceful Dutch way of living during the occupation of Long Island by British troops in the Revolution. The domiниes were still preaching to their congregations in forceful Dutch, and it is recorded that British officers and men attending Sunday morning services responded lustily to prayers, unaware that they were subscribing to the success of George Washington and not that of King George. So if you were a British soldier occupying someplace, you should probably learn the other languages they're speaking so you know what they're saying. Young Mrs. Voorhees, with her 2 infant sons, lived in a small dwelling in Gravesend, while Stephen, her husband, was with the Patriot Army. George Washington, anticipating the British invasion, ordered all supplies, which could feed and comfort the enemy, destroyed. The way she writes sometimes. Okay, so George Washington, anticipating the British were coming, ordered all the supplies which could be available to the enemy to be destroyed. The decree threatened the life of the Voorhees family cow and the food supply. Oh no! The food supply of the children. During inspections, the local Patriot officers turned conveniently blind, and when the Hessians marched to the territory, they found no Voorhees cow. It was living in the house with the family. Can you imagine? Don't look under the bed. There's a cow under there. Jacobus, oldest of the infants, grew up and married. His bride was Ida Stillwell, weaver of the coverlet we just looked at. Interesting. A Dutch farm stood on a 90-acre property constituting Bergen's Island on the shores of the bay and flatlands, the oldest part of which is said to have been built for the West India Company in 1643 for use in the wampum industry. Yeah, Molly, I think it's the thing that is so intimidating to me is like the warping, um, because you have to do that a certain way. And I mean, I guess, and it's laborious and easy to mess up. So, yes, I have major respect for people that weave. Also, big respect for people that, do like are knitters and crocheters, because that it does involve a lot of counting as well. And I yeah, a huge not involved within 30 seconds. Yes, I love applique so much, and I've often thought about it. It's because I'm not good at other stuff. Oh, Anon Maker, that's right. You do. You knit and spin and do all the things. So, yeah, we bow down to you. um, yeah, I mean, that there's mathematical stuff involved in textiles, and the looms and the mechanization of the looms is essentially the beginning of computers. So don't forget that. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's the not the least mathematical stuff is what I can live with. So a four heddle loom. Um, I'm trying to remember. The heddle isn't that like what that's what the threads go through, right? The heddle is the separates the warp and tells it to go up and down when it's yeah, okay. I don't know how to properly describe that. Headed into a life of OCD counting. Okay. Oh, that's interesting, Mardim. Yeah. Okay. So, and there's so much with, our different outlets of creativity that help us with stuff that I guess, sometimes we don't think about unless it's helped us. So, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Like, I can knit and I can crochet, but I do like Molly and I were talking at the beginning about count and cross stitch. If it requires like very specific numbers and they aren't consistent, that's what I really struggle with. If there's a pattern that you kind of get the cadence of, that's where I'm good. That's where and actually, not to digress too much, but my little thing here. This one this was is called it's a cypress tree. It's supposed to be a cypress tree. That one was actually the easiest one for me to do because you end up doing kind of this. You end up with this cadence where you go up the half stitch and then you come back down and you go up and you come back down, and it was so much easier to me to do this than this monster. That Bethlehem star, man. I couldn't. So yeah, it's that mathematical and also I think it's spatial too. It's kind of the spatial aspects of it. So anyway, I digress. It's so interesting though, we look at what crafts and take away the creativity part of it and just look at like the technical skills, what we are drawn towards and what, is like a struggle to us. So very interesting. Okay. Let's see. Dutch Farm stood on the 90-acre property constituting Bergen's Island on the shores of the Bay and Flatlands, the oldest part of which is said to have been built for the West India Company. It is 1643 for use in the wampum industry. The wampum industry. It was a whole industry. In 1793, John Bergen inherited the property from his father. He and his wife, Rebecca, raised 8 children in the homestead. And if I remember correctly, John and Rebecca Bergen, she talked about in her other book too. Joanna, born in 1805, kept a diary from 1825 to 1829. It is a succinct account of life on a Dutch farm, and as everyone in the neighboring communities was a cousin, and that's spelled Cozen. There's there's probably some pedigree collapse and some endogamy going on in that community. There was much visiting, and a social picture unfolds. Joanna's brother Tunis, and I remember his name. I remember this. Joanna's brother Tunis was a weaver for the Flatlands community, though he also worked with his brothers at the manifold duties imposed by such a large plantation. Joanna's diary entries weave a pattern of their own. And these are all quotes. John breaking flax. Mrs. Waite here to hetchel. A hetchel or a heckle was a square board onto which were set iron teeth. Through these, the tangled flax was drawn until the fine fibers were combed from the coarser tow. And if you are an OG quilt nerd, you will remember Mary. This was probably late last summer. Mary showed a video of, and I think they were in Ireland or Scotland, UK, somewhere. But they were growing and making flax, making linen from flax. And I remember, seeing those. I mean, it's a thing with like giant teeth, like nails sticking up like a bed of nails, and you whack the, like the fistful of flax, you do whack it and pull it through, and it combs out the good stuff. And that's just like one of the physical things you have to do to flax. You have to beat it and I guess it's one of those probably good to get your frustrations out. Just like felting. Felting is very good for getting your frustrations out. There were those who were expert and swift in the task and sometimes were hired for the service. Nothing was wasted, for even the tow was woven into floor mats or spun into rope. Again, this is another quote from Joanna. Toonies finished weaving for the season have wove 437 L's. And an L-E-L-L or E-L-L-S was a measurement. And I know we've talked about this. I know somebody looked it up. I don't remember how much an L is, but it's smaller than a yard, I think. I'm pretty sure it's less than a yard. Peddler here took dinner. Tunis finished our piece, 80 L's. Took 548 quills. I'm not sure what that is. Over on the sleigh to visit Mr. Stillwell. Anne, Mother, and I took our wheels. We're assuming that's a spinning wheel. Unwilling ever to be idle, Dutch women carried their spinning wheels. Oh, yes. Carried their spinning wheels with them whenever they went visiting. And so I'm guessing these were small, portable spinning wheels. I've seen lots of spinners these days that have these cute little portable wheels. I've been to a couple of art festivals and retreats and stuff where the spinners come with their spinning wheels, and there's those ones where they can kind of sit back. It looks like a recumbent bicycle, and they just I love it. It looks so relaxing. But yeah, it's yet another artisan technique to learn and accumulate equipment for, and I have to put a limit on things. After Joanna's father died, her mother took over management of the farm. The diarist notes, Mother pays wages to all our colored people. Okay. Later, on July 4th, 1827, Independence Day, the 51st year, clear and the wind west, Betsy the colored girl over to Mr. Kuenhoven's to keep the 5th of July, the enslaved in this state being made free. Okay, so I guess in New York, 1827 would have been an emancipation date. For the woman of today who still believes her foremothers wove, spun, and made patchwork quilts because they had nothing else to do, here is one. Killed our ox today, had 84 pounds of fat. Mother and I finished the candles, had 350. Without editorial comment, Joanna recorded startling news. A man aged 21 years was married here this day to a lady upward of 40 years, this being her 9 husbands. I'm guessing what she is saying is that a man of 21 married a woman of 40 and he was her 9th husband. Oh my gosh. Elizabeth Taylor, you ain't got nothing on this lady. Oh, interesting. Flax wheels are smaller. I didn't know. Huh. Very interesting. Right? If you were 21, having had a 21-year-old man as a child And I guess I'm trying to remember. I guess I met my husband. He might have been 22 when I met him. But yes, they are a little bit foolish at that age. So maybe it wasn't necessarily about bravery. It was just about being foolish. But yeah, I mean, can you imagine being 8 husbands in? I mean, she's 40, good for her. She snagged a 21-year-old, you know? I mean, what would we say about a man that was on his 9th wife? Gosh. We'd say, Richard Burton, move over. Many coverlet patterns seem to have been common property. They traveled as the quilt patterns had by way of the peddler who took dinner and stayed overnight and brought news of the outside world as well as tidbits of gossip from the neighboring town. He and the itinerant weaver were welcome visitors in every isolated farmstead. Peddlers were versatile men who paid for their hospitality in many ways. There is the story told in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, of one who, after listening to the reproaches of a housewife because he had no new quilt patterns to offer, seized scissors and cut a dashing design from folded paper. Now that's interesting because the quilt that somebody recently posted on the AQSG members only site asking, wonder whatever happened to this, happens to be a paper cut quilt. I think like it's one that has some pretty intricate designs, and that would be like the German paper cutting is, I think, typically in Pennsylvania when you have one of those quilts that they say, well, you know, it's like a paper cutting. It's kind of like how they do the Hawaiian quilts, but you know, it's folded up like a snowflake and cut. You know, but it wouldn't be a full size, you know, full quilt. Cutting it would be an individual block. So yeah, that's interesting. Hey, Eva. So the quilt made from his pattern in bold scrolls and blinding colors. And remember, she thinks blinding colors is like red, green, and cheddar. May be seen in Landis Valley Museum, Lancaster. So too, the traveling weaver was depended upon for new weaving drafts. In double woven coverlets, 2 fabrics, one overlaying the other, interlace at outlines of the pattern and reverse color. Though the domestic manufacturer, who has a suitable loom and better than average skill, found double cloth weaving within his or her capacity, more and more, the production of such coverlets passed into the hands of craftsmen with specialized training. Feminine taste always favors free-flowing design. Does it? Does it, Florence? There had been no hope to indulge this preference and little scope for inventiveness in the restrictions of the 4-harness looms. Oh, well, there you go, Enon Maker. She's talking about the 4-harness loom. This longing found outlet in hand embroidery of floral forms in bright wools, which woolen blankets of the period were decorated as if in protest against the linear rigidity of squares and plaids generally. In a private collection, there is a creamy wool blanket woven with indigo blue to make a 5-inch plaid. Onto each square is worked, in the same blue wool, flowers, leaves, and seed pods, which duplicate old botanical prints. It is edged with hand-knotted blue wool fringe and dated 1778. Also in private collections are to be found the rare rose blankets made for dower chests of prospective brides. These were woven of softest white wool and decorated with characteristic conventional roses on each of the 4 corners, embroidered in bright-colored wools. Found on Long Island and Pennsylvania, they belong to the first half of the 19th century. The housewife continued to prepare, spin, and dye her yarns, but she awaited with impatience the visit of the weaver who would arrive with his own equipment, set it up in the weave shed or barn, and offer to her eagerness the excitement of new patterns. Now this is interesting. So the itinerant weaver comes with his own equipment. Okay, Enon Maker, if you're still there, what would that be like? I mean, you have to break the loom down, I'm guessing, and like maybe put it in a wagon or something. Like, I just picture looms. I mean, I think about the loom that was like in my high school art room that nobody ever used. You know, we had looms when I was in college in the textile department. I mean, I just feel like they're like a big thing, and taking them apart must have been kind of a pain in the rear, and having to put it back together. I don't know. It was not long after the revolution that power machinery for spinning and weaving displaced the spinning wheels and the ancient hand looms, marking the end of an epoch. An epic. Epoch? Epoch? How do you say that word? An epoch? Like all new inventions, the automatic loom was dubbed newfangled. Look at this newfangled. Was dubbed newfangled and therefore impractical. The first jacquard loom, let's see, probably don't know too much, or there may have been a loom in situ, and the weaver, we've placed to place and used that machine. Yeah, I mean, she just said in here that the weaver arrived with his own equipment and set it up in the weave shed. So I'm wondering when she says his own equipment, if maybe that doesn't mean the loom itself, or I don't know. That stuff sounds really impractical, whereas, automatic looms to me sound practical, but so the first jacquard loom came to the United States in 1826, and there is no austerity in the patterns that are possible to the miracle loom. Women welcomed the advent of pictorial designs, considering them far more elegant than their old-time geometrics. Apparently, there was nothing that could not be pictured, and alas, many weavers set out to prove it. And they overdid it. Well, all right, Florence, according to you. Eagles, scrolls, festoons, flower groups, birds of paradise, birds on nests feeding their young, harps, peacocks, palm trees, pagodas, villages, Boston town, Washington on horseback, e pluribus unum, mottos, names, dates, locales, and weavers' signatures, many of them on one piece. Now, what do all of those things sound like to you, besides woven things that she's talking about? To me, they sound an awful lot like Baltimore album quilts, or album quilts in general. Like, that's the kind of stuff that people just like to picture. And so, if they couldn't weave it, they sure as heck applicate it. I can tell you that. Master craftsmen with better taste exercised greater restraint. Probably the finest example of early jacquard coverlet, which is this other picture. It's very pretty. So this is woven in one piece. This is a good example of the later mechanical weaving on a jacquard loom. The type is characterized by the naturalistic designs, patriotic symbols, and weavers and family names and dates, generally in the 1840s. So that's this. Very pretty. And you can see down at the bottom, there's names. Collings. And look how the S is backwards. What? That is interesting. The S is backwards. If you're new here and you've never watched Quilt Nerd streams, we had very frequent discussions about letters when you have letters on a quilt. A lot of times, or not a lot of times, but enough times that it's noticeable, you see backwards letters, like backwards N. N is very common to be backwards. You see backwards S's. And there's lots of different reasons why we, hypothesize. We don't know for sure. Okay. So, this early jacquard coverlet originated in New York State. It was purchased in Poughkeepsie years ago. 6 small flower groups comprise the central composition. They and the small stylized petal clusters which separate them are identical units used in coverlets signed by S. Butterfield and J. Cunningham, both of whom added to their signatures Weaver, North Hartford, Oneida County, New York, and dates running from 1837 to 1840. Both weavers worked the popular Declaration of Independence design, usually in blue and white. It shows the before-mentioned floral units with George Washington on horseback in corners and a border in repeat of the motto, "Under this we prosper." The pictured coverlet is woven in a single width. Its color is not red, not quite rose, but a lovely soft coral pink. I would not have guessed that. 2 corners bear the inscription, "Agriculture and manufactures are the foundation of our independence, July 4th, 1836. Opposite corners have American eagles. Eagles, double columns topped with Masonic emblems, and alternated with what may be Independence Hall, form 2 side borders. The name C. Collings probably is the person for whom the coverlet was woven. The fine work of the master weavers lives on in the clear and exact drafts. They look so much like music, which were left a heritage for devoted adherents who weave not so much for profit as for artistic expression and to carry on an ancient tradition." It's very cool. Let's look at this again, because holy moly, I would have never guessed that this thing is like a coral pink color. I just kind of always assume these things are like brown and white, blue and white, sometimes green and white, but I have seen some sort of pink and coral colored ones, but this one I would have guessed. So you can see over here on this side, looks like what she's saying it might be, was it Liberty Hall? And then you've got eagles, and then you've got this thing about agriculture, manufacturing. And I think it's interesting. I've definitely seen, pictures of these where, and I mean on quilts too, where they, it's like they write this stuff out, but they don't seem to measure, so that like sometimes they're cutting words off like right in the middle. I'm not sure. It seems like this one probably, no, it didn't. Because this, foundation of our independence is like all cut up into separate words. Or separate portions, or by syllable. You can see down there at the bottom, independence is cut in half and flows down to the next line. They seem to have thought nothing of that, and they didn't plan. Today, if I was going to figure that out, I guess I would have either found, like worked it out so that it all went across the bottom or something, or worked it out so the text was small. I don't know. I would have figured it out so that it would read properly, but I feel like these makers of antiquity, they're just like, nah, no more room for this word. I just bring it around to the bottom. Which actually reminds me, it's so funny. There's this little church, not far from me. It's actually on a road called Church Lane, and it is currently, it's a Russian church now, and I'm not sure like what denomination. It's a very small church, but whatever it was before that, it was one of those kind of tiny, I guess like evangelical congregations, but it kind of sits up from the road a little bit and off to the side in this little tiny parking lot that's the front of it. And it's still there. It's currently covered by like bushes and a tree or something, but there's this sign, and it was supposed to say Jesus was the answer. But I'm guessing, and it's this beautiful script, but I'm guessing they ran out of space, they didn't plan well, and so it says Jesus is the ants. A-N-S dot. And I was like, okay, right off the Red-Nosed Reindeer says, independent. Yep. All right, well, we still got lots of time. So I'm going to get into part 2, which is the manual of instruction. So let's see how much we get through here. My cat is informing me that despite the fact it is only 3:22 here in Maryland, she is hungry and is not going to take no for an answer. I'm sorry, sis. We can't eat right now, okay? She's the sweet one. She's probably the real mastermind here in our house. All right. So this is part 2, a manual of instruction from American Quilts and Coverlets. And this is chapter 5, how to make a quilt. This would be interesting to kind of put this up against Avril Colby and Ruth Finley, who probably never made a quilt in her life, but still wrote about it. I think way back when I read Ruth Finley's book to here on the stream, there's this one part where she explains how to cut out. Okay, all right, okay. This is the clumsy cat. She has a hard time getting on the back of the chair. There she is. She's a beauty. Anyway, there was this instructions for how to cut out this like diamond shape presumably for making like Lone Star quilts, where you fold up a square and then you just cut. Oh my gosh, it does not work. In no way, shape, or form does it work. So I was like, Ruth, who gave you these instructions? You clearly didn't try it yourself. So anyway, I digress. But it would be interesting to kind of line up how to make a quilt among all of these writers and see like what's consistently the same and what is, off the charts a little bit. All right, chapter 5, how to make a quilt. The modern woman who admires an ancient heirloom quilt and wishes wistfully that she could make one like it, but contemplates the work involved with misgiving, can be reassured. The task today is neither arduous nor necessarily lengthy. Unlike her great-grandmother, she need not raise sheep, grow and break flax, spin yarn, gather herbs, wrestle with the dye bath, nor wait for the visit of an itinerant peddler before she can purchase a pretty pattern. Equipped with the knowledge of plain sewing, the good sense to select a pattern within her capabilities, and a modicum of neatness and accuracy, even the novice can produce a creditable, even beautiful patchwork quilt. Yeah, Florence was a cheerleader for the newbies. Perhaps the would-be quilt maker already has an antique quilt in mind whose design she would like to reproduce. This is an excellent idea, especially if the original is available for use as a guide. Of inestimable value are the many nationally Florence, why you got to use these words that are circularized women's magazines. Quilt articles appearing on their pages at frequent intervals offer a great variety of patterns, traditional and modern, in some instances complete working directions, and charming illustrations of finished specimens. Commercial firms whose products, cotton thread and cotton batting, are essential to the quilt maker issue pamphlets with color charts accompanied by directions that seem basically foolproof. Many of these also contain blueprints for making a quilting frame at home. There are two mechanical techniques used in making a top for a quilt: piecework and applique. I think she describes this probably a lot more fluently than Dr. Dutton did. In piecework, patches are sewn together by seaming. In applique, patches are applied or laid on to a background and felled down. The old-time quilt maker served an apprenticeship on simple designs before she attempted a complicated rising sun, a mariner's compass, or an elaborate appliqued bride's quilt. I still think that's true today, but I also know some like newer quilters that didn't know what they didn't know and jumped right into something crazy like a mariner's compass. And obviously, folks that jump into something like that, then they're like, oh, I can't do this. I'm not talented enough. And it's, obviously because they jumped into something too difficult. But also, there are those newbie quilters that you want to choke them because they're like, oh, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I jumped in and made a mariner's compass king size. I didn't know. And it's flawless. And you're just like, you love to hate those people because you're like, oh my God, you are so talented. You did this your first time out. But you're also like, let me just choke you out because I've been trying to do that for years and I'm not there now yet. The beginner would do well to practice making a block or two in each technique and then select a pattern to be worked in whichever technique she handles with greater ease and with greater pleasure. That's right, Florence. Thank you. I prefer applique to patchwork. Patchwork should be relaxing. It can be enjoyed. When the needleworker feels herself getting tense, work should be laid aside for another day. Never must the labor on a quilt become drudgery. That is very good advice, Florence. The next section is planning. A magnificent heirloom spread merits special treatment. Dramatic in design and very likely strong in color, not always strong in color in heirloom designs, it deserves not only the appropriate bedstead onto which to display its ancient charm, but it should keynote the decorative scheme of the entire bedroom. Now, Florence loved to decorate, and she made some of her own home decor. Like, she did like a crewel work bedspread, on top of making quilts. She did crewel work curtains for like her bedroom and I think maybe her dining room. She did not let, the grass grow under her feet when it came to like home decor and sewing. Not everyone is fortunate enough to possess such a treasure, but the new quilt can be planned for the type of bed it is to adorn, and the style, coloring, and pattern can be selected to fit in with existing decorations. This is an individual problem, one in which the innate good taste of the quilt maker is put to the test. Personality may be expressed, but it will be wise of the neophyte to leave drama to the experienced decorator. Simplicity in design, meticulous workmanship on excellent materials are least likely to result in disappointment. Indeed, these ingredients, plus a dash of imagination, could result in a spread which would be an object of beauty and a joy forever. Now she moves on to sizes. There is a practical as well as an aesthetic reason for planning a quilt for the bed on which it will be used: size. Is there a valance around the bed? Are the pillows to be covered by the spread? The manner in which the counterpane is to be used will determine its size. And whether it's going to be dominated by a cat who has jumped down and left the quilt on the back of my chair all crumpled. So are the pillows to be covered by the spread? The manner in which the counterpane is to be used will determine its size, and size will determine the effective disposal of the pieced or applique blocks which are to be fitted within its margins. A full-sized counterpane used without petticoat valance and long enough to fold over pillows should finish 90 by 108 inches. For twin bed size, the 72-inch width is usual. Unless they are made to order, beds are standard in length. Unless the quilt is to be a geometric all over, the maker must decide in an early stage how large the unit squares are to be, whether they are to be set parallel to the border or set diagonal, whether there is to be lattice work, sash work, terms which mean strips, or alternate plain blocks. The term set is used by quilt makers to indicate the special manner in which the unit blocks are joined together. So, a square set or an on point would be the diagonal. Beginners have found it useful to experiment with squares cut from paper, which may be placed on the bed to help judge how many blocks of a certain size will be needed and what disposition of them would be most effective. You know, it's funny, I think that's a brilliant idea. But today, I think about, the things that I've designed have primarily been smaller. I think I've probably only designed one or two things that were very specific to a bed size. But I basically opened up Adobe Illustrator and said, 90 by 108 inch canvas, and then fill that in. That's to me so much easier than cutting out block sizes and laying them on the bed. But when it's 1949 and you don't have Adobe Illustrator, this makes a lot of sense. The pattern could be roughly chalked on one or more of the squares as a further help. A good preliminary plan saves later worry. At this point, a decision should also be made concerning the width of the border or borders and exactly where they are to begin. Proportion is very important. When a valance is used, and I think when she keeps saying valance, I think she must mean a dust ruffle, around the bottom part. Because, when I think of a valance, I think of curtains, at the top, or, even a 4-poster bed that has canopy, that's a valance. But I'm pretty sure she's talking about the down on the bottom. When a valance is used, obviously the bed cover needs only to be large enough to cover the top of the bed or fold a little way over the side. Measure for this carefully. Yeah, dust ruffle. Yep. All right, now she moves on to materials. Selecting materials generally involves a shopping spree. You said it, sister. Fine needlework deserves the compliment of the very best materials a purse can afford. I feel like Florence would be right at home with people that have discerning stashes. I feel like she probably would look askance at somebody that has a big, messy, overstuffed stash like I do. I have one of those tubs that's probably you could fit a human being in it, and just full of scraps and stuff. I feel like she would look at that ugh. But I also feel like people that have curated like a very beautiful stash, particularly with like vintage fabrics and old fabrics and stuff, she would probably be like, you're on the right track, friend. There are sprigged percales that imitate early calicos, demure plaid ginghams, old-fashioned paisley prints, 18th century floral chintzes. The small pattern prints are best for mosaics, stars, or any pattern requiring tiny patches. Bold floral, bird, or scroll chintzes or linens show to best advantage in wide borders. If the quilt maker is skillful enough, these flower sprays and bird groups can be cut out and used for applique decoration on many parts of a spread. And of course, what she's talking about here is broderie purse, which is where it's like the original fussy cutting. You cut out those beautiful chintz designs and then applique them down. I'm trying to, so yeah, so last Thursday, I think I mentioned the Baltimore Applique Society last week. I went to their program for their in-person meeting was Debbie Cooney, who is one of the 6 know-it-alls, and she had a bunch of just these beautiful quilts. And I'm trying to think, where was I going with this? Oh, there was one, it had to have been late 1700s, early 1800s. I think it must have been early 1800s. And it was chintz, but the cutouts were so precise and they overlapped. So like this, it wasn't exact. Well, I guess it would have been considered a medallion, but it was like a tree. It was in the middle, and it was built of so many different pieces of chintz, and they were so expertly stitched together and overlapped, like you would have never guessed, like from a distance, that it was, broderie purse. It literally looked like a big, beautiful printed panel. So broderie purse, like it's not my favorite thing in the world, but to see it done really skillfully it's pretty amazing. A central medallion employing a cutout chintz unit may be surrounded by the old-time manner with a series of pieced or applique borders. The value of contrast should not be forgotten. The effectiveness of all pieced work depends on a judicious mixture of patterned with plain and light with dark materials. Confusion in design will result if this elementary rule is disregarded. So basically she's saying, like, don't make it all one value. You gotta have the lights, you gotta have the darks. Unless you're going for low volume Florence, in which case you would have all lights or all darks. I feel like modern quilters and Florence Peto would maybe not get along very well. Fabrics should be of good quality, firm weave, and soft texture. Today, most good-grade cotton wash goods are pre-shrunk and fast dye. With reasonable laundering care, they should neither shrink nor run. If there is any doubt about it, try washing a small piece in a white bowl. Broadcloth, soft cambric, percale, gingham, sateen, and soft finished chintzes are recommended. Silks and satins with challis linings sometimes are used for the luxurious, down-filled quilted puffs, but for the average quilt, cotton always was and still is the favorite material. Yardage required depends so much on pattern and size of quilt, only the most general estimate can be given here. An applique spread usually requires more than a pieced quilt. A full-size top requires at least 10 to 12 yards, and the proportions for colors naturally are determined by the pattern. I think that is, I've heard that those numbers before when you talk about, she's saying a top requiring 10 to 12 yards, but really think if you're making a full-size bed quilt, I'm often shopping from my stash unless, I've made a quilt that's, got like really large amounts of any one color. I think it is really sobering when you realize how much fabric actually goes into, a meticulously pieced quilt or a quilt with a lot of applique on it. It really is a lot of fabric. And, that just takes us back to the idea of like when people sell quilts or people expect to buy quilts at such, a low price, and you're like, this thing has this many yards of fabric in it. That alone is staggering at times. Um, so full-size top requires at least 10 to 12 yards, and the proportions for colors naturally are determined by the pattern. For the background of an applique spread, full-sized, and for the lining of a full-size quilt as well, 9 yards are required, 3 lengths of 3 yards each. Yeah, I mean, something that's 90 inches wide. We're working with 42-inch typically, unless we've got some wide backing. We're working with 42-inch cotton, and so you need multiple lengths of that or widths of that. And at this time in the 40s, I mean, I think you still had fabrics that were even more narrow than that, so like 36 inches maybe. I'm trying to remember my mom still has some of those fabrics from back in the day. They were definitely more narrow. And I mean, I have stuff, and I think I've even showed it here, that I've bought antique fabric, and it's definitely much more narrow. Usually cotton material is 1 yard wide. Okay, so 36 inches, and we're used to 42 now. The seams of these lengths must be firmly whipped together and then pressed. There must be no creases to interfere with quilting or to make ridges in the finished quilt. Excess width must be cut off both sides. The cutoff strips can be utilized for patches or lattice work. Cut off both sides. Yeah, I mean, I guess you think about it. Oh no! Uh-oh. Try... Can somebody type in the... because I don't want to lose my place. Can everybody else hear me? Okay. Patty, if somebody can type in there, Patty, maybe refresh your screen. That might help. Because it looks like my levels are okay. It sounds like other people can hear. Oh. Yeah. Refresh. Sorry, you guys. Today's been a kind of a, I don't know, a poop technical day. My computer knows it's Monday. I just assumed it was you. Yeah, I mean, my levels look okay, I think. See if I can increase some more. I know Druid always tells me that my audio sounds low for her, but everything sounds low for her, so I don't know if that helps any. I just turned it up a little bit. Okay. Cotton batting is the preferred inner lining. Some quilt makers like flannelette, and others use a wool blanket worn thin. I'm wondering if by flannelette she means just flannel? I don't know. Only cotton batting gives that much desired puffy, blistered look to quilting. So she's even talking about that vintage look, that people love. Don't pre-shrink your fabric. Get the 100% cotton batting and you'll end up with that scrunch. Never use sheet wadding. It is too stiff for easy quilting and does not give the fluffy effect. Well, now that's interesting. What is sheet wadding? Back in 1949. I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what that is. It must have been something. The difference between cotton batting and sheet wadding. Oh, good, Patty. I found when I'm watching streams, sometimes it's just like your computer's like, yeah, I'm done. You have to refresh. Warmth will depend on thickness of interlining, but close and fine quilting can be achieved only through a thin layer of padding. Linings, white, unbleached, or of printed cloth, must be without starch or dressing, and they must be soft textured enough to allow for easy quilting. For cording purposes, roving or candle wicking gives satisfaction. Use tiny puffs of cotton batting for stuffing individual segments of designs. And it's funny, she's calling that corded, like she's saying that is cording, but really that's stuffed. I think that's the only thing I think that Florence is saying here that I'm kind of like, wait a minute, you're mixing your bummer, Molly. Oh, it's a Mac. Oh, poo, Molly, you've got a Mac. Macs are the worst. Okay, so next we get to cutting. Cutting the patches for a pieced quilt is a precision job, and so much depends on mathematical accuracy that each patch must be cut individually. Never try to cut a pile or even several patches in one operation. Right? This is that thing I described to you that Ruth Finley had in her book where you fold the thing up like you're supposed to end up with 8 layers and you just go snip, snip, and it's supposed to be you're going to get 8 diamonds. Doesn't work. So Florence knows what she's doing. More latitude may be allowed in cutting patches for applique, but if the applied design is to be in repeat, with each block joining onto the next for a kaleidoscopic effect, precision and uniformity are desired. Naturalistic designs are more free-flowing and therefore not so demanding. Whether the, and what she's saying is like, this is why cake likes applique. Because if, one of your leaves is just a little bit smaller or scrunchier than the next one, it's not that big of a deal. Whether the patch is to be part of piecework or a unit applied to background, the ancient term being laid on work, cut a template of cardboard for each differently shaped unit of the design. Indeed, cut several. Place this cardboard replica of the pattern on the wrong side of the cloth and, with a pencil, mark the exact outline. Cut 1/4 inch from the pencil line. When seaming, sew on the pencil line. Keep angles and points sharp, and if the template frays, discard it for a fresh one. The template phrase, I think she means like if you start getting dents in your cardboard, it's time to use a new piece. When a border or long continuous strip is to be used, they should first be cut off the material. When a border or long continuous strips are to be used. Okay, so what she's saying is don't just take like yardage and just sew it along the side and then cut it. You're supposed to cut your strips first and then sew them on. And here's a tip. If you've ever had issues with putting borders or long strips and they get kind of wonky, it is because you're stretching it or you're not stretching it enough. So the traditional instruction is, and I have heard this repeatedly from Marianne Fons, and she is she is a source of good quilting advice, that you cut your piece to the exact length you need and you pin it. And so it's, there's not going to be any stretching or movement, and then you'll have a nice non-ripply sashing or border or whatever that you're doing. That's your tip for the day. You might have already known this. I will say that I'm one of those people that was always looking for a shortcut. And so, for instance, the jelly rolls, and I think a lot of times they teach you this with jelly roll quilting, piecing, that you just, sew it down and then whack it off and then, do the next thing. And I guess if you're working in small units, that's fine. If you're doing like a log cabin or whatever, but if you're going to use like those jelly roll strips for a sashing or like a little skinny border, you should measure it out first and cut it to the right length before you go sewing a long strip. Squares and triangles must be cut with the weave. Right angled triangles must have 2 sides straight and 1 true bias. Long slender patches, such as those that occur in starburst and compass patterns, must have straight threads running from center of base to apex. Hexagons must have 2 sides on straight of goods. Cloth should be pressed free of creases, and if there is any doubt about straight of goods, a thread can be pulled for guidance. Have you ever done that? If you're unsure, and I do this with linen, where you're trying to get like a really straight edge, and I mean certainly a ruler and a rotary cutter gets you a nice straight edge, but linen especially is real wiggly, and so what's best to do is to pull a thread and pull it out, and sometimes it'll break halfway and you have to go back down and find it and pick it out. But pull that out, and then you've got a straight, and then you could snip along that little piece with scissors, and you've got a straight of grain, even if it's like wiggly like linen. Okay, next we get to piecing. Piecing consists of sewing patches one to another with a running stitch making a seam. A knot or back stitch should start each seam, and the end of the seam should be fastened securely. Now, it's interesting that she says that, because any of you that were taught, particularly piecing on a machine, they always tell you don't back tack, because you end up with like a little lump there at the end. Now, when you're hand stitching, it's kind of a different story. But, typically when you're stitching on the machine, you're going to cross back over and kind of catch your ends, if you're piecing. So, I always learned, like, don't worry about back tacking. Care should be taken to have all seam widths even, following the penciled lines. Compare patchwork units frequently to be sure they are identical. Press the seams to one side. So Florence did not believe in pressing them open. Never press them open, in fact, she says. Trim protruding angles. If two bias edges come together, keep the sewing thread just taut enough to prevent stretching. If there are many long bias edges in the selected pattern, sew a running stitch inside the edges as a stay to keep them under control until they are seamed together. That's interesting that she suggests that. I mean, that's if you've ever sewn any clothing. Necklines are, tend to be an issue. Sometimes your shoulder seams, and they'll tell you to do that. Either on the sleeve cap or the shoulder seam itself or your neckline, you do something called a stay stitch. And that's just to keep it from stretching and sagging, while you're constructing it, and even after it is sewn. It helps hold the fabric from getting all stretched out. It stands to reason that all unit blocks for a quilt top must be exactly the same size. When they are set together with strips, the lines of the rows must be even with each other. None of this setting together is difficult if care is exercised from the start. And how many vintage and antique quilts have we seen that do not follow any of this at all? When you look at them, you can see like stuff is going like, you can't really see my little quilt here. This one is, it's seamed in a couple places, but for the most part, it's like one big thing. But you want those rows to stack up on top of each other properly. They look real ridiculous when they're like, nah. When geometrical patchwork involves the sewing together of many tiny pieces or diamond-shaped patches, the old-time quilt maker did it over firm paper, brown or white. Often such a quilt was made over paper cut from letters, and sometimes dates and parts of names or places have helped identify the age and origin of the quilt. Suppose the pattern is to be the well-known grandmother's flower garden, in which the unit patches are hexagons of uniform size. And she does have a little illustration here where she shows the making of the patches. She shows stitching through the paper, which I don't recommend. But back then they did use, she says, a firm paper, but if they're cutting out letters and stuff, and sometimes it's like newspaper and stuff, it's flimsy, and so that is why they stitch through the paper. But today, if you use cardstock or like the pre-cut paper pieces that you can buy at the quilt shop, don't stitch through those. It'll break your fingers. Like, it's terrible. You want to just tack the corners of the fabric, and that works just fine. All right. The paper pattern should be cut the exact size of the template. The material should be cut as described before to allow 1/4 inch for seam. Lay the paper shape onto the patch of material. Fold the 1/4 inch seam allowance over the paper and baste. Now, she says 1/4 inch. Depending on the size of your paper pieces, if you've got larger hexagons, you have to use more than 1/4 inch. Simply because, folding it over the paper takes up, it's microscopic amounts, but it does take up enough that you can be way short of a 1/4 inch seam allowance once you get them all basted together. After a number of patches have been prepared and checked to make sure they're uniform in size, they are joined by holding two pieces together firmly while whipping the edges. It will not matter if the stitches go through the paper. That is true. With an over and over stitch, so a whip stitch, use a fine needle and 60 or 70 thread. The basting stitches and paper may be removed as the work progresses, or they may be left until the entire top is finished. The technique assures well-defined angles and points, and it looks well on the right side. That I too agree with. I like English paper piecing, and in fact, I patterned something recently, and to do it as English paper piecing, and it didn't come out exactly like I wanted, but it was certainly easier than actually trying to sew these very complicated angles and stuff together. It was truly Y seam hell. Okay, applique. All component parts of an applique pattern should have their edges creased back on the pencil line and basted. For circular forms, run a fine gathering thread near the edge before turning back and full in as needed. So she's meaning like the ease. You're kind of easing it over. The thread and the fullness must not be visible on the outer side, for good applique must be free of ripples. If desired, flowers, leaves, and arabesque forms may be padded with a thin layer of cotton batting before basting them down to their positions on the background. These will then have an extra raised effect when the final quilting is done around their outlines. Stems of flowers and meandering vines are made of biased triple folds, which are to be whipped down on both sides. Yes and no. That is most likely how these were done. This looks like it's probably a bias. Then that has been whipped on both sides, but the Baltimore album quilt makers, and I've seen other album quilts that when they have a very thin, very thin vine or thing, there's a different way to do that. That doesn't, and you're still tacking it down on both sides, but you create a seam first and then you fold it over so you can get as narrow as you want. I'm trying to remember if I have demonstrated that before. I ended up having to do that on one of on an album type block I was making a while back. Let's see. Tuck stem ends under flowers and leaf ends under stems. On a concave curve, so concave, caves in, clip in well to the folding back line to help preserve the original contour of the patch. Use tiny whipping stitches with a fine needle and 70 thread to applique patches to the background. Sometimes applique motifs are finished with buttonhole or chain stitches. Whatever the technique, even spacing and small stitches are the hallmark of skillful workmanship. The next section is called Basic Patterns, Easy to Draw. In quilt lore, basic geometric patterns bear classifications which indicate to the patchworker their construction. There are the 1 patch, 2 patch, 3 patch, and 4 patch, 9 patch, and double 9 patch. Some of the fundamental patterns, most of which are based on a square, are very simple and yet very attractive. They can be drafted by anyone with a ruler, compass, and a sharp pencil. First, a square is drawn the exact size desired for use in a quilt. The corners must be true right angles. The following directions and sketches, so now we have a little bit more information, will be helpful in making a few of the popular star arrangements and geometric repeats. To make a 4-pointed star, 4 patch, draw lines dividing the previously determined square horizontally and again vertically. From the center, make a mark about 1/3 distance down. Oh boy, Florence. This is where we get complicated. All right, so make a mark about 1/3 distance down on each of the 4 lines. To make sure of accuracy, set foot of compass on exact center of square and place point of compass or your pencil, on one of the marks. ascribe a circle. Join the points where the circle touches the dividing lines with the four corners of the square. All right. So this is what she's talking about. And why? So I guess figures A and B were the paper piecing, were the English paper piecing. So this is what she's saying. So you're getting this circle in there, and then you're making compass. You know, like in geometry, where a compass, it's like the thing that masons use. It's shaped like that, and one end is pointy and the other end is a pencil. That's a compass. So yeah, so basically she's saying that you're dividing the block, and then you're doing this. You shush, Jill. Then you're doing this circle in the center. And then from the corner to where the circle intersects your cross lines, then you're drawing these angles. So then this is what you're attempting to get, these kind of things. So complicated, Florence. The four-pointed star thus formed could be made of figured material and backgrounded with white or any plain color. A suggested variation shows each point of the star cut in half lengthwise and seamed, cut in half lengthwise and seamed together again in two sharply contrasting colors. When pieced of a French blue and white, this star makes a quilt of clean-cut nautical smartness. And she's talking about this one. The clean-cut nautical smartness. You're following this, Miss Rawl. Okay, your coffee. Keep that caffeine going, and yeah, you'll be able to figure out Florence. Let's see. Another variation, square the circle as shown in figure E, which is what she's talking about here. Make one unit with a dark star, light square center, and light background. Alternate this with a unit made with light star, dark square, and dark background. Repeat this alternation throughout the pieced top, and the sparkling kaleidoscopic result is known as World Without End. So that's this one in the center, World Without End. The ever-popular Grandmother's Flower Garden requires but one pattern, a hexagon with its size based on individual taste. She explains how to draft a hexagon. Nautical smartness as wild as the seas. Oh, goodness. I don't know how Florence would feel about that, Morodin. So, draw a square about the size of the desired unit hexagon. Draw horizontal and vertical lines, dividing the square into quarters. So, again, your square, just across square. Place the foot of compass at exact center of square and describe circle. So, make a circle. Keeping compass set at the same angle, place foot at intersection of vertical line and circle. And mark off 6 exact divisions of the circle, as in sketch. Draw straight lines connecting them. Oh, Lordy. You know, when geometry involved circles, that's when things went awry. So this is basically what she's saying. So you're putting, like, this is the first intersection she's talking about, and then you're going around, and you're, like, you're marking off all of these, you know, measured points. Okay. Let's see. Carefully cut on straight lines of the hexagon and use it to make a template for any mosaic whose basic unit is a hexagon, as in Grandmother's Flower Garden. To make the attractive 6-pointed star, draw a square the size of the desired star, divide into quarters, and describe circle in the same manner as for the hexagon. Mark off the 6 divisions. Now, connect by lines. 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 1. Also 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 2. You're basically creating a Star of David is basically what you're doing. So this is shown in figure J. We'll look at that again in a second. The unit triangle can be used to make the pattern. A variation by filling in the 6 points of the star. The correct diamond shape will be apparent for making a true 6-pointed star. Divide the points in half lengthwise and piece together again with contrasting colors, and the star will appear. So here we go. So yeah, I mean, you have to be measuring your circle to get those lines properly, and then you can make all these fabulous things. Or you could use Adobe Illustrator, electric quilt, or your brain is melting out of your ears. Yes, it is too mathy. I love the idea of buying pre-cut hexagons. I like using Fisker's hexagon punches to make my hexagons. There is a Jenny Beyer book that explains all of this, and it's actually kind of cool because the book is not a quilt book. It's a book for making those little puzzle balls, and like different kinds of them. And you've probably seen these things like you can, like their little baby toys, children's toys when you stuff them. Anyway, she's got this whole book about those, and she does get into this. Like if you want to make a big one or you want to make a really tiny one that are outside of the pattern pieces she has, she explains how to draft them. And it's doing this kind of thing, but it's really interesting because she gives measurements, like how to do the measurements and stuff. So anyway, I can't remember the name of that book, but it's a good one. So yeah, we just go pre-buy our things. Oh, you have to, yes, fatty. Yeah, those little puzzle ball things are really cute. Okay, the star motifs may be appliqued to a square background and set together with lattice work or with alternate plain blocks. Oh, so she's giving you permission to applique them down versus like what is probably going to be an insane. I mean, you've got like some crazy Y seams in there if you're gonna piece the whole thing. Oh crud! That thing just went in. I don't see what Patty said. So you don't have the book, but you have the pattern. Okay, Amy Sims. Yeah, I think that I've seen, I think even like one of the big 3 pattern companies, like McCall Simplicity, I think they had versions of it, and yeah, it's not just Jenny Beyer that made those, but her version was really interesting to me because it explained all the drafting. Not that it was easy, but it was interesting, and it did work if you follow the instructions. Okay. Astonishing are the effects which can be obtained by manipulating the simplest of all pieced blocks, a square cut in halves diagonally and pieced together again in contrasting colors. So the half square triangle. Piece 9 of them together and it becomes a shoe fly, a 9 patch. When framed with strips of figured print and plain corner squares, it becomes Philadelphia pavement, a double 9 patch. An all-over pieced top of this pattern is unbelievably pretty, proving that the beginner need not be afraid of mediocrity because of simplicity in a pattern. So this is what she's talking about, shoe fly. So frame with strips of figured print. Okay, so I guess the shoe fly is the center. The centerpiece, and then it becomes Philadelphia pavement when you put the sashing and the corners together. So I know I've heard of Philadelphia pavement, and I never could remember what it was, but I guess it's basically a shoe fly with sashing and corners. An intriguing and deceptive 4-patch is the Barbara Frietchie star. Dr. Dunton had a Barbara Frietchie in his book. That or no, maybe it wasn't in his book. It's definitely in his collection. There's a whole piece about it. It's really, really pretty cool. So this is the Barbara Frietchie, and I mean it's just half square triangles. It looks really complicated, but It's just half squares. Or no, wait a minute. Right? Yeah. Yeah, that's the Barbara Frietchie. I'm assuming I'm pronouncing it right, by the way. It's Frietchie, and this is a very old pattern. You know, this was early 1800s maybe, or even older than that. Anyway. Deceptive because it appears at first glance to be intricate, it is composed of 16 squares, cut diagonally and pieced in contrasting colors. Where two dark triangles meet to form the long diamond-shaped patch, it can be cut as one patch if desired. So too may be cut the white triangles where they come together on each of the four sides of the block, a matter of preference. So yeah, what she's saying is, where that's long there, that can be the product of, a diamond, or it can be the product of, multiple half square triangles put together. A red and white pin dot print pieced with deep blue or plain white is suggested for this design. Okay. And so the figure at the bottom, it shows the four blocks set together. All over geometric patterns may be carried right out to the edge of a quilt and do not require a border. When a border is used, a perfectly plain one frames the pieced composition more effectively than a pieced or otherwise decorated one. So I think I'm going to leave off there. She's got more in here about the star, and she gets into the Lemoyne star. So we've got some instructions on how to do that. And I think my brain is also hurting because of these descriptions of math. And then she gets into borders. And so the borders get very detailed. I'm going to leave you with one very cool picture, which I know if Jill is still here. Look at this clamp. Look at that bird clamp. I know Jill collects these, and I know she had some in her inventory too. I don't know if she still has them, but the clamp is such an interesting piece of needlework. Yeah, and for those of you that are following along with us and reading Antique American Needlework Tools, I think we're getting to clamps this week. So there's a clamp, very delicious looking clamp. So I'm going to end there, and we'll pick up on the Lemoyne star and how she describes that on Thursday. So I'll recap on Thursday, but a couple things. Next week I'm going to be out of town. I'll be at the very cool Quilt History Retreat in Temecula. And so there is not going to be any chance for a pop-up simply because of there's no internet there. There's internet, but it's bad. So I'm going to for sure say, don't expect a pop-up. It's not going to happen. But I will have exciting things when I come back. And our friend Quiltish, if you follow her on Instagram, you may notice that she's been in the UK and she's in France. She went to I can't remember the name of it. It's For the Love of Thread or something like that by Quilt Mania. It's a big show in France, in Paris. She's gone to that. So she has lots of cool pictures. She's shared some with me, and I'm like, gorgeous, gorgeous things. So she has agreed to come on the show and give you guys a show and tell, and so we can live vicariously through all the exciting stuff she saw. So look for that to come after I'm back. And I have a ton of stuff that I've seen lately that, I just haven't had a chance to show you guys yet. So we've got that. And if you are following along with Quilt Nerding on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we are, excuse me, the frog in my throat is back. We are, of course, reading this fantastic book by our friend Dawn Ronigan, and we're on our third week. But the fourth week, because I'm a dummy, didn't occur to me until literally today that our fourth week, when Dawn is supposed to come on and do a interview with us, is going to fall while I'm in Temecula. So we're having to sort of redo the schedule there. So there might be more time if you are interested in joining to still get the book and join in all the festivities if you're interested. So check us out there. That is on YouTube, Quilt Nerding. And as always, with the exception of next week, I'm here Mondays and Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. And I will be out. I will be back on Thursday. And so I'll remind you guys of all this stuff. And Jill's going to be doing something while I'm out of town. So keep an eye out for that. She will probably have an unboxing of some sort or something like that. Yeah. So keep an eye out. You guys have a wonderful week. I will talk to you soon. Mwah, mwah.